Well, mitochondria reproduce, and there are stimuli we can use to increase them. Exercise, fasting, and some molecules can also influence the growth of mitochondria. Coenzyme Q is again important in energy production. Some of the concepts we've talked about, like caloric restriction and exercise, will stimulate metabolic pathways that are also related to anti-aging or healthy aging. But these can also be stimulated not just by lifestyle changes like exercise, but by other molecules like resveratrol or turmeric and others. Here we see how NADH converts into NADH, which can be stimulated, as I mentioned, with polyphenols. For example, resveratrol will activate these sirtuins, which are genetic components that help increase the survival of neurons and other aspects related to longevity. Here's a bit more of the same, specifically talking more about resveratrol, which can help with those aspects. It's an example of a polyphenol. There are many others, but it's to give you an idea of how, through herbal medicine and dietary supplements, we can support these metabolic pathways and create epigenetic stimuli that will allow us to gain more benefits in terms of longevity and energy. With resveratrol, there are publications related to the benefits in terms of neurodegenerative issues, cardiovascular problems, etc. The problem with resveratrol is that it is not absorbed very easily. Its intestinal absorption is very poor, and we must therefore look for compounds that are bioavailable. Well, plants have adaptogenic substances, one of which is polyphenols, that nature has designed to defend itself against adverse situations. So when we consume these plants and these substances, such as herbs and roots, in a way, we're gaining those adaptive benefits and therefore potentially enhancing our resilience to future stress in our bodies and minds over time. It's something that nature has been doing for millions of years. So being able to nourish ourselves with these herbal remedies, whether through food or dietary supplements, is like giving the body a boost to deal with other stress-related issues, and obviously to avoid chronic fatigue, which is a later consequence. Here in this slide, we talk about resveratrol, turmeric, and this component that's mainly found in green tea, but not just in green tea, along with the resveratrol I've already mentioned. As you can see, turmeric acts at the level of inflammation responses and energy utilization, and we will see how these substances will act to favor this. Exercise is clearly one of the most important aspects of integrative supplementation. We take into account aspects not just from the perspective of supplementation, but also habits to achieve a better response in therapy. Here we see how the army activates all these metabolic pathways, and well, if we could find a supplement that did all this, it would be one of the best. Well, emotional stress is one of the biggest factors that causes chronic fatigue. Let's remember, the autonomic nervous system is divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic. Normally, we live more in the sympathetic state, which is that restlessness, that fight or flight response that helped us evolve to hunt and overcome adversities. But in our current society, we have chronic latent sympathetic stress, which ultimately leads to chronic fatigue. And the parasympathetic state is that phase of relaxation, of more stillness, where other processes like digestion and other central functions are favored. So when there's stress, we see connections between the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the pituitary gland. Therefore, a continuous emotion or stress will generate endocrine stimuli that will ultimately disrupt the entire physiology of the body. And the parasympathetic state is that phase of relaxation, of more stillness, where other processes like digestion and other central functions are favored. So when there's stress, we see connections between the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the pituitary gland. Therefore, a continuous emotion or stress will generate endocrine stimuli that will ultimately disrupt the entire physiology of the body. Especially when it comes to fatigue, the adrenal glands are key players in the adrenal cortex. So if we have too many demands in our environment that are psychologically stressful, or at least we perceive them that way, the hypothalamus will cause an overexcitation of the cortex. This will initially help us deal with stress, but if it goes on for too long, it will simply exhaust the adrenal glands and will end up with adrenal fatigue syndrome. Here in this example, we see how on the stress scale, there's a part of the curve where we can no longer respond and we enter the burnout phase where we're already experiencing chronic fatigue, which is the topic of this conference. When the adrenal glands are overstimulated, they can respond, but then we'll see a tendency toward atrophy, and we'll find alterations, especially of an immunological type. Also, an excess of corticosteroid stimulation at the beginning can lead to immunosuppression, but when we start to lack endogenous corticosteroids, we tend to have allergies and other types of symptoms, along with a lack of energy. So there's a type of stress that's positive, which helps us survive, and then there's chronic latent stress, which can lead to burnout and chronic fatigue. In the chains of chronic stress, we see that it affects the immune system, it impacts the endocrine system, and it will also affect the nervous system. So we need to tackle stress with supplementation and other tools here to see the impact on different organs. And finally, knowing that if we have no stress at all, that's not good either. We need to have stimuli to keep the system alert, but if we go overboard, we'll end up with low performance. For relaxation, you need energy. If we don't have energy, we're going to be tense. Diseases like hypertension can be a manifestation of lack of energy, or deficiencies in coenzyme Q10 and magnesium can also trigger blood pressure issues. There are also some medications used to lower cholesterol that can cause deficiencies, leading to coenzyme deficiencies that result in muscle and other types of alterations. So in these cases, we need to supplement with ubiquinol or coenzyme Q. In the world of phytotherapy, we have several adaptogens that can be used. Of course, in the master's program, we dive deep into all of them and look at dosages and interactions. But just to give you an idea, ashwagandha is one of the most commonly used for stress and burnout cases. Astragalus is another one that supports the adrenal glands, especially magnesium, which we've already talked about. Another adaptogen is Eleutherococcus, also known as Siberian ginseng, and rhodiola, which I love because it's a plant that supports both stress and anxiety states, as well as low mood. We've seen the B complex in many metabolic phases, and vitamin C is essential for the production of certain neurotransmitters. The adrenal glands need vitamin C to produce all the hormones that give us that boost of energy at the brain level. Neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine tend to drop, especially dopamine and norepinephrine with chronic exhaustion, and we see this manifesting as low mood and also a lack of energy. GABA is one of the most important neurotransmitters that are anxiolytic. It can also be supplemented. GABA receptors are what some medications stimulate to perform their anxiolytic function. So we have a component from supplementation, which is GABA, that has a function that goes a different route and can help us in case there's a deficiency of this component for anxiety issues. Remember, anxiety is one of the major causes of chronic fatigue.